Luckily, we might be accumulating evidence that the village is in fact contemporary. And that's a game changer, because if you think about the social and the economic dynamic of a period where brochs suddenly appear in the Iron Age, how much more substantial are the requirements of labour, of offering your services to people, of the resources that are required, if not only are they building brochs, but there's a settlement attached to many brochs that may have been as substantial as 200 or 300 people per village. Suddenly, that big social change of the establishment of brochs sometime in the Middle Iron Age becomes an even bigger deal if it also is accompanied by people relocating from wherever else they were in the landscape before that to inhabit a new nucleated, centralised location within the landscape. So if that's the case, it's an even bigger revolution, as it were, within the Orcadian countryside at that point in the Middle Iron Age. So we're hot on the trail of that. And here, just a few pictures of some of those sorts of villages from other sites: Gurness, Howe, Lingro, Midhowe. 20 or so are known in Orkney. There's almost certainly many more of these broch villages to be found elsewhere. And this is our version of it, or part of our version of it, at the Cairns. So all well and good. Here's a nice overview of the site, gives you a sense of the size of the trench. Our trench is dominated by that big, gigantic polo mint of a broch at the centre of it, and we are slowly uncovering many, many buildings, as I said, in and around the trench, as well as the boundary works, the ditch, excuse me, the ditch and bank that encircles it, which is over here, whoops, over in this corner here, and then again over on this side, over here. So there's an enclosure around the broch. It's maybe some 85 metres in diameter, and it's multi-ditched on the front. So where it comes round to the entrance into the enclosed space encircling the broch, actually there's at least 2 lines of ditch. So making it even more impressive for a visitor approaching the site. They have to pass through more boundary works in order to gain access into the village space, and then onwards, probably via a passageway like Gurness, towards the central broch itself, sitting as the axis mundi within the landscape. There's many, many more things I could say about the broch. There's lots of information that we've already garnered about the lifestyle of the inhabitants of the broch. There's an awful lot more that we'll get out of future excavation seasons, particularly the next 2 seasons, and even more information that will finally be wrested from our post-excavation analysis and assessment of the materials from the site. That's when we really will start to make big inroads into understanding exactly what was going on in terms of people's activities, their tasks and their practices. But there's a few things that we can pick out or pull out from the site. Towards the end of it, there's grand formality as well as grand effort. There's almost as much effort expended on putting the broch to bed for night, forever, as there was perhaps in terms of constructing it. So it's reduced in height to the height that it is currently. So it's taken down to about 2 metres in height. Probably originally the broch would have been at least, I would say at least 10 metres in height. There's evidence that we have from the architecture to suggest there were 2 internal floors above the ground floor, or at least 1 upper floor fully floored, fully boarded over, and then maybe a mezzanine or a loft-like space in the second floor. But the end of the broch, it's taken down, and the rubble from that process is introduced into the interior of the broch, packing out the inside, and then also on the outside of it as well. And I don't know if people are aware of the Clach broch that's been recently excavated in Assynt by AOC Archaeology and by the local community there. There they had strong evidence that the broch had accidentally, or by some process, gone on fire. Catastrophic fire had occurred. Unintentional catastrophic fire had occurred, or at least unintentional by the inhabitants. And the broch had collapsed. And all of their rubble was completely vacant of artefacts, of material and deposits. The rubble had simply come down and it was formed in tip lines, etc. At the Cairns, the way in which our broch deforms at the end of its life is very, very different. The rubble doesn't have any tip lines in it. There's no sense of portions of masonry coming down wholesale, mouldering away over time and collapsing down, or even swiftly collapsing down. All the rubble is higgledy-piggledy. It's all sorts of angles, and what's more, there's lots of pockets of air in it. There's no soil formed in it, so the rubble went into the interior of the Broch so rapidly that no soil could form within it. And the only kind of soil-like material within, as a matrix within that rubble, is the frost and rain and weathered shatter off of the stones themselves. And unlike the Clachtal Broch in Assynt, at the Cairns, all over that rubble there are deposits, special deposits that have been introduced into the rubble, parts of articulated animal bones, stone tools, the odd bronze pin here and there, whole pots that are laid flat on the rubble surface, upturned, inverted, and then smashed to pieces with another piece of rubble so that they collapse in situ. Lamps strewn in the rubble, special deposits of what appear to be organic materials, like some kind of basket full of peats that is just introduced into the matrix of the rubble and then rots down over 2,000 years. So there's very strong evidence that there are votive deposits being made, and especially outside and near the entrance, and probably several of you will know about this, right outside the entrance, a very formalised deposit in the form of a large whalebone vertebra carved into a bucket-shaped object, a receptacle, a vessel of some description, wedged up against the outer wall face of the Broch using a saddle quern, a really massive saddle quern, a grinding stone. You can see it in the picture on the left here. And then two red deer antlers, two shed red deer antlers, two right-sided red deer antlers, so presumably from a different animal, propped against the outside of that whalebone vessel. And then in the inside of it, the contents of the vessel held two neonatal lambs, so two newborn lambs, a range of fish heads and shellfish, and then the jaw of a man, probably, difficult to tell anatomically from just a single jaw, but the DNA analysis will soon bear this out one way or the other. The jaw of a fairly senior in terms of age for the period, somewhere between 50 years old and 70 or older, difficult to estimate when people get into a certain age category. So for his period, fairly old. Fairly toothless, just 3 teeth remaining. The rest of his teeth in this mandible were resorbed, so he'd lost the teeth in life long enough before his death for the bone to actually close over. Very wacky diet. This might sound slightly counterintuitive to you, but almost all human remains from the Iron Age across the United Kingdom show no marine dietary input into the human diet. That's to say, people are not utilising the most obvious food resource that there could possibly be, at least in an island context, which is the marine resource. There are very, very few human remains from the Iron Age period in the whole of the United Kingdom have any marine input into their bones when they're isotopically studied, when we look at the radioactive isotopes and they're laid down in their bodies. He does. He's got a diet which is almost as rich in fish or marine protein as you would find in some of the Viking cemeteries when fishing is a very big deal in sites in Orkney. So he's a bit odd, he's a bit unusual. But having said that, there are very few human remains that we can actually look at and analyse from the Iron Age period. It's one of those ironies of archaeology that at the point in time in the Iron Age when we have the most evidence for settlement, where we suspect we have the densest concentration of population at any point in prehistory, the people themselves are relatively absent. They've gone somewhere archaeologically invisible at death. We very rarely find cemeteries. There's only one Iron Age cemetery really from the north of Scotland from this period, and that's on Westray at Birstness. And it's atypical in any case because 90% or more of the individuals buried there are themselves neonatal, or at least within the first few years of life. So it's a very non-representative, atypical demographic that's exhibited there. So we've got this issue, we've got this problem where the dead are absent from the archaeological record for the Iron Age. And it's not just that they're being cremated and burnt, because they do a lot of that in the Bronze Age, and we still can identify funerary remains from that period. So something else is happening, and you can bear that mystery in mind for what we find out subsequently. But it is very interesting. This individual's jaws there, buried in a whalebone vessel, smacking of the sea. It's got red deer antlers propped against it. Wild or semi-wild, certainly an ambiguous sort of location within the domestic wild kind of spectrum. It's got fish heads in it, and it's got newborn lambs in the vessel as well. It's an interesting concoction of materials brought together, and it's happening right at the end point of Broch. It's some form of votive deposit related to putting the Broch to bed for forever, and we may well find more deposits like this in the next excavation season. We've got the well underneath the structure. We'll be doing more work in that this season as well, the so-called well. That's why I've got it in ditties, why I've got it in inverted commas. These are another type of underground structure. I won't go into it in huge amounts of detail because I could give an entire module probably on underground Iron Age structures and features, as some of the students would probably know. But it is something that's really wonderful to have a fully preserved underground, three-dimensional, fully preserved roofed structure, steps.